And now that Mehrtens has joined us, I thought I'll just show you this one as well. Yeah, in my winding room.
Oh yeah, how's that?
So Mehrtens, this bottle, unfortunately, buddy, is from the World Cup final.
You're kidding.
Has
it aged as well as you have?
Well, I'm too scared to open it now because I think it's probably a little bit off.
Well, so are you.
Yeah, exactly. I know. But age stands, as you know, time stands still for no man. Eh?
Guys, welcome. Great to have two absolute legends of the game here. Joel Stransky for the Springboks, Andrew Mehrtens for the All Blacks, also partly South African. And we're going to talk 1995 Rugby World Cup final with two of the main guys in it. Gavin Rich is here with me as always. Guys, welcome.
Thanks very much, Brenden. Great to be on the show. Mehrtens, great to see you, mate. With all respect, Gavin and Brenden, it's really cool to chat and catch up with Mehrtens, who lives on the other side of the world. We don't get to chat that often. But you look well, you look healthy, and it's really cool to chat to you.
It's nice to see all you guys. It's been a while, a lot longer for Brenden and Gavin that I've seen you. But Joel, it seems almost every year, or certainly every World Cup, we managed to catch up briefly. But I'm just, feel very thankful that you've allowed a Kiwi in to join what will be a big celebration for South Africa looking back 25 years, won't it?
Yeah, well,
Carry on, Brett.
No, I was going to say, but I mean, you do have some South African roots, Smith, and we remind you that quite often. Yeah, I mean, I think just at the end of the day, I can't believe it's 25 years. I mean, I know it feels like just the other day that Joel and the guys were there at Ellis Park doing the 20-year celebration, and the time just seems to fly. Oh, you guys, I don't know if you guys can believe it's 25 years. Sorry, man. I should have said who should answer.
Well, I managed to inadvertently walk into a celebration dinner in London during the 2015 World Cup, and 20 years since the 95 final then, and it was pretty much all South Africans there at the dinner, which I thought was going
to... just on that, maybe going into that, maybe let's go back for a week after that, the semi-finals, because today is obviously the semi-final day as well. You guys, Joel, had that epic game in the rain where you guys scraped through against France, and then the next day watched the big fella sort of tearing apart England. Just take us maybe back to that.
So firstly, that game against France was, I'm not sure it can be called epic. It was nasty, it was wet and horrible, and obviously delayed, and our flight was delayed, and straight after the game, we rushed to the airport and we flew out. We got back to Joburg really late, probably midnight. The guys who lived in Joburg and Pretoria were allowed to go home, and I think that was probably the significant factor that us guys from the coast, we weren't allowed to because Kitch Christie wanted us all to stay at altitude. And we watched the first half of the All Blacks game against England together, and it was so demoralizing watching the All Blacks smash them and make them look so bad, and Jonah looking so good that we sort of split and went our own ways, and got back to the hotel and watched the end of the second half, and Kitch Christie was there, and he had watched it, and he'd recorded it, and he watched it again, and then at the end he stood up and he walked out and he said to Mark Andrews, who was my roommate, and I, we were sort of half playing pool, half watching. He said, "Oh, we can beat those guys." And I think that was probably for us the first time where I thought, well, if he thinks we can beat them, maybe we can, because they had been just devastating against England. They'd been sensational. And I think up until then, to be fair, Mitch, you guys probably not really been tested. And, to play against that really good England side and make them look so average and win so comfortably, and for Jonah to have been just so enormous and powerful and strong and skillful, and everything he did just turned to magic, was probably for us the first time we really took real notice of any of the opposition we play against.
Yeah, and it was one of those games where everything went our way, particularly at the start. And Jonah was phenomenal, but it was just everything went for us in that first 25 minutes. I think we were up 25-0 after 20 minutes, and so I think when you look at the remaining 55 or 60 minutes of the game, England maybe actually pipped us on points for the rest of the game. We just got off to such a great lead, so they worked their way back into it. Will Carling scored a couple of tries, which must give everybody some hope playing against the All Blacks. So England had come right back into it. So it doesn't surprise me probably at all that a coach sitting there watching going, okay, well, let's take aside the score. Let's look at the action. And England really was able to put some heat on these guys in the second half particularly. So, we certainly weren't complacent. We had been able to dictate terms. We've been able to dictate the pace of the game all the way through the tournament. And not taking anything away from the other teams. Ireland had hit us really hard in the first 15 minutes, but then we had things our own way, I guess, the rest of the game. Wales weren't particularly strong. Even in the quarterfinal, we didn't play particularly well and still ran up quite a lot against Scotland. And so we didn't think, that we were a laydown to win or anything like that. But certainly the drums were beating a lot after that England game, thanks to Jonah.
Does it, history, you say that you weren't complacent, but history has sort of repeated itself, and certainly in this last World Cup in reverse. It was England who really gave the All Blacks a good beating. And I was interviewed by on a podcast, and by one of the English newspapers over there, and they were very confident. They were extremely confident that they were going to go on and beat South Africa. And I said, listen, I was at Newlands in 1995, and I said, nobody gave South Africa a chance after seeing Jonah run all over England, and Michael Catt obviously in particular. And it was on that basis that I thought that, South Africa had a real chance in that final, because it must be very difficult, even though you weren't complacent, it must be very difficult to go into a week of a final on such a high and being seen as favourites. Certainly, maybe not in South Africa with the South African, but certainly everybody else was backing you to win quite comfortably.
Well, I think just human nature means it is quite hard to achieve standards like that 2 weeks in a row, and that's not an excuse for the final at all. We sure as hell did not think we're going into this final and this is ours to lose or anything like that. We'd come into the tournament as fifth favourites. The year before, we'd drawn a series in New Zealand with South Africa. We'd lost 2-0 in a series to France. We came in as fifth favourites, and we weren't really considered by many people throughout the tournament. So we were playing each game as if we were playing the next team that was above us, So there was the same feeling for South Africa. There was, promise you, there was no thought within our team of, we can just step out and recreate that again. At the end of the day, we couldn't. We threw everything into it in the final, and South Africa was the first and only team that really stood up, knocked us over, took the wind out of our sails, took away our time, didn't let us dictate the pace of the game, and they did that so well, and we weren't good enough to overcome that.
I'm glad you remember that 1994 series as the draw, because the last test was drawn, but actually the first two tests New Zealand did win. And Joel, that was a series that you missed, and I know you felt pretty miserable about missing that series, because you should have been on that series, given the players that went. How much did winning the World Cup make up for? I mean, they obviously don't compare, but I know when I interviewed you for the book last year, you said that it really did make up for the fact that you didn't go to New Zealand, something you'd love to have done in your career.
Well, I think it certainly made up for it in one sense, but I think if you look back on your career, and in particular a time like that where there were still full-blooded tours, and I'm hoping World Rugby will go back to full-blooded tours, because I think there's something really special, something unique about them, something about taking the game to the outlying areas, something about having the All Blacks in our country, on our shores for 6 or 7 weeks, really, spreading the game and enjoying the hospitality across the port. To have missed that tour for me was devastating. It was definitely the low light of my whole rugby career. It was the biggest disappointment. to have won the World Cup the year after was obviously a massive highlight and huge consolation. But if I think back, that the fact that I missed that tour didn't play any role in the World Cup, but it certainly still lives with me as that disappointment.
Kitch Christie took over from Ian Mack as the coach, obviously, who was on that tour. And on the end of year tour in 1994, I think you told me that initially you didn't really gel with Kitch. You fell out of favour as the first choice fly half. I remember correctly, Henny was playing. But then you came back into favour playing, of all places, at Newlands against Western Province, and you dropped a goal to win that game. How much did that play in maybe working on your mental toughness ahead of the World Cup final, and obviously getting back into Kitch's favour?
So I think, like any coach, any player, I mean, I would tell you that Kitch's greatest asset was his ability to understand people, to get to know them, to understand them, and to bring the best out of them. And I would say that not just as individuals, but as a collective as well. You know, he had this ability to take a Joel Stransky who's very different, and a James Small who was a creature of the night and thought differently, behaved differently, was, you know, and get them to work incredibly well together. And I think it took a bit of time to gel with him. But I think that game at Newlands was Kitch's real test for me. I think he picked me that game, and the other warm-up game he picked Henny to play against the Sharks in Durban, or in SA15 in Durban. There was a weaker side. But in that Western Province side we played against at Newlands were 3 or 4 players who fancied themselves of being in that Rugby World Cup squad, and who weren't. They had a massive point to prove. Tiaan Strauss was devastated, and they just wanted to beat us that day. So to go out on a day like that and be tested and get banged up. I got banged up. I had some stitches in the first half, I think. It was tough. It was hard. And then to find that resilience and sneaker win at the death with the drop goal, I think, was maybe the day where Kitch saw that, you know, maybe understood me as a human being and as a player a little bit better.
And maybe it gave you an idea in your head and his head on how you could win a big game at the World Cup as well. Not that in South Africa we've got this antipathy that they've always had in New Zealand.
No, so I mean, I tell you what was amazing on the weekend was New Zealand Super Rugby. The 2 drop goals at the end there was sensational. What a couple of brilliant games. And so before the World Cup, we never ever spoke about drop goals. Kitch never ever spoke about it. It was only in the week of the final that he said to me, you know, why don't you kick more drop goals? And he did make it sound rather easy. I was trying to explain to him that you've got Zinzan Brook and Mehrtens and Basham trying to charge you down and stop you getting it away, and not as easy as it looks. But he did plant the seed. But it was never a plan until the week of the final, where I think he realized just how valuable any single point was going to be. And in fact, Mehrtens had an opportunity for a drop, I think, towards the end of normal time, and slipped it by the tiniest of margins. And even at that point, I remember Ed Morrison saying to me, geez, you were lucky there. And I nodded my head and almost said a word of thanks that it had gone by.
I think I had several attempts in that game, and one of them might have got close. The one that people in New Zealand remember most was from a ruck right in front, and all I can remember from that kick is not even the strike of the ball. All I can remember is US van der Westhuizen's eyes as he came steaming out of the blocks around that ruck. And I think, I mean, if it had gone straight anyway, I think US would have charged it down anyway. That one went pretty wide. But it was something that we didn't really put in place either, Joel, for the drop kick. I mean, we'd been, you know, running our moves and going through our game throughout the rest of the tournament. The way the game panned out in that final, where, you know, after a bit of a slugfest for 50 or 60 minutes, it became pretty obvious that it was just going to be in increments of 3 points. And at that point, it became a bit more stressful looking at that. It's probably a situation for me because, we hadn't sort of planned it and had any setup for it. Also, while I could strike a drop goal nicely, it wasn't really a speciality of mine. I was no Johnny Wilkinson or anything like that. Certainly didn't strike one as well as that the last one that you did in extra time. So I got one throughout the game, but missed 2 or 3. And like I say, that the one crucial one that really was probably a good opportunity position-wise on the field, US van der Westhuizen just absolutely champed me out on it.
Does that sort of thing, does that haunt you? I mean, it's such a massive moment in the game. You were 2 minutes away from time. So if you'd been successful with that drop goal, you would have won the World Cup. I mean, does that sort of thing haunt you later on in life?
It doesn't tend to haunt me until somebody asks me if it haunts me and I have to think about it. Look, I look back on that and I regret that. And of course, you feel horrible for letting the teammates down first and foremost, doing something that is part of your role and you're a goal kicker and then you fail to kick a goal that will win you the game. You let your teammates down, you let the wider group down, and you feel like you've let the country down. And I guess, what can you do about it? You can't change it. You go back, you try and learn.
But I think listen, we can just pick it up where I'll fix it in editing and that, and I'll sort something out.
I can't remember.
We were talking. I think the last we were talking, what I can remember is Mert saying about how the missed drop goal haunted him. I think that was we were.
No, he didn't.
No, I think Joel had just started talking about his drop goal. I'm gone.
Mert, I don't know if you remember the last time you did that when I was there. Eh? Do you remember? It was I think it was the World Cup in France. I think 2000. What was that? 2007, maybe even 2003. It could have been. We were on that program with those rugby league guys. That it was like a question of sport, and there was a spelling contest. Gav, I promise you, spelling contest. I had to spell Francois Pienaar. Spelled Francois wrong. God. Mertz had to spell, I don't know, some islander's name, but it was like 20 barrel. It was like, to say the name took about 3 minutes. To spell it took about 5 minutes. He went through this whole thing like apostrophe E O T apostrophe L, and then I think it was Matthew Ridge sat there and he went, I can't believe it. You've got it right. And Mertz stood up live on studio, gave the aeroplane out the door, and never came back. We're going, he's going to come back now. He's going to come back now. Never came back. Just disappeared. I didn't see you. I don't think I've seen you since then, actually, now that I think about it.
Matthew Ridge and Mark Ellis. My God, it would have been
exactly.
03. Yeah, because I wasn't playing. I didn't get selected intelligently, and quite rightly so. I didn't get selected for that 03 World Cup. Good God, yeah. Whenever you spell any of those Islander names, it's a vowel extravaganza, isn't it? Yeah. If you're not good on vowels, you're out.
Yeah, look, unless you're a fly and you can't even spell your captain's name, then you're out long before that.
you normally stop at Frankie, don't you? You don't know about the O and the I and the right place.
I think we've just got to FP.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Well, let's jump in. Mertz, I don't know if you want to talk about that drop goal, and then we can just take it from there.
Well, which drop goal?
The one just before time.
No, but you did, Brenden, he did speak, because I remember Mertz talking about Joost being in his
getting
place.
Close, yeah.
But Gav, you say that
he had crazy eyes at the best of times. Joost, like Mac, wasn't he? He's got those crazy eyes, and even more so then, I could just feel them boring through me. And if I hadn't got out of the way, if I hadn't missed the drop kick and got out of the way quickly, I reckon Joost would have bored through me himself.
Maybe and Joel, maybe obviously you're going into the tension those last couple of minutes, going into extra time, just the feeling amongst you guys there.
So we'd seen the drop goal go close, and in fact, even then, and I think I said it earlier, Ed Morrison even gave me a look saying, geez, you guys were rather fortunate there, and we were, but as we'd said all along, we felt we were the fittest team at the Rugby World Cup. We'd spent many days and hours and long days making sure we were really fit and really well prepared. So, when we got to extra time down there on the field, our thought process was, well, this is going to suit us. We're strong, we're fit, we hung in this far. It's going to be a tight game, but we're well positioned to go on and win this.
Joel, when we spoke to Mark Andrews a couple of weeks ago, he spoke about how Kitch had driven you in the training. And he never ever told you when you were going to be when the training was going to end. It could be a half-hour session, or it could be a 3-hour session. And he says that came back and helped you guys in the final because you were used to playing in a game or in a session that had no end. Would you agree with that?
So I think there's two elements to that are very, very apt from second row in particular, from my roommate Mark.
Well, there's a number 8 of it.
Yeah. But deep down he's a lock. Let's be honest. Yeah. So there were two things about the fitness training that really stand out for me. The one is there were times where we didn't know, when we were going to finish. And I think mentally that does make you strong because you've got to go on and you just got to go on and you just got to guts it out and keep going till eventually someone says stop, not to a target. It's like an undefined target. And I think that does make you mentally strong. But even then, on the back of that, we at times would go till Kitch said stop, and then we would start our half hour, our power half hour, we called it, where we as a collective would do step-ups or something as a group, and we would do them together. The backs, we would link arms and do our step-ups, and the forwards would do their last scrums and then link arms and do their steps. And I think that not only ensured that we were super fit, but we also had this real common bond that we'd been through hardship together, that we'd really suffered through those fitness sessions, and that we knew the guy next to us and ourselves could go through another fitness session, And I think when you get to extra time and all that, it's not something you think of conscientiously, but it sort of sits in the back of your mind deep down, and as a result of that, it just drives that self-belief and that thought process that, you can go on and do this, that you are able to go on and in this tough time and overcome another 20 minutes.
Mertz, you guys were not only going into extra time, you were doing it at altitude. Was there ever talk about the altitude at the World Cup? I mean, it's every time a touring team comes to South Africa. In fact, every time a team goes from the coast to Joburg in South Africa, there's always talk about altitude. How prepared? I can't remember how much time you spent at altitude at the World Cup, but was that an issue, and was it a talking point back in '95?
No, it wasn't an issue. Certainly not. It was a consideration, I guess. You're at altitude. The air's a bit thinner. It's likely to be drier. That was probably what we found the most, is just the dryness. So it's just something that you manage as well. I mean, as a goal kicker, I didn't mind it at all. And as a golfer, when you're out on your day off during the week and you're hitting the ball, if I'm normally hitting at 300 meters on my 3-wood, then I was probably putting it 380. So you notice that. I mean, in our first time up there, it was my first time back to South Africa since having been born in Durban. And I remember in the early days of training, Jeff Wilson and I would be at the end. And he had quite a big place kick, and we'd be kicking further and further back. And then you get around that 10-meter mark, your own 10-meter, and back further. And suddenly the posts behind you are closer. And we were like, this is extraordinary. So, I enjoyed that from a kicking perspective. We'd played 2 of our pool matches at Johannesburg and 1 at Bloemfontein. And then we played our quarterfinal at Pretoria. So really, we only went down to the sea level once, for that game against England at Cape Town. And we at the time thought, oh, gee, this is actually working against us, playing at Cape Town on the heavier ground against a team that's more used to heavier grounds. So, we got through that. And we like I say, we'd spent a couple of weeks or a couple of games playing at Joburg. So we knew the area around Sandton and stuff. We were comfortable coming back up to Joburg. It was a familiar place to come back up to. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I never beat the Boks at Ellis Park, but we had those couple of wins early on against Wales and Ireland, and I loved the ground, and I loved going back there, and it was intense, and we looked forward to it. Like, fitness was important, and we felt we were probably the fittest All Black team for a long time. Laurie Mains had worked us really, really hard over the summer. We'd tried to play a fast brand of rugby throughout the tournament, and without being overconfident, we were confident in our own fitness. Where I think we maybe were slightly behind the South Africans, just in that physicality and just the defence that tires you out, just getting up and knocking people over, which they were able to do for not just 80 minutes but 100 minutes. But going into extra time for another 10 minutes each way. Like I say, we weren't overconfident, but we thought we could keep going with a little more gas in the tank. I only just looked at the kind of the score development throughout the game the other day, and I hadn't realised that we were down 9-6 at half time. So we'd managed to win a pretty gritty second half by 3-0, and then I think we took a 3-point lead going into that extra time as well before Joel got in and sorted out the historical moment for South Africa.
So going into the game, How confident were you guys? I mean, I know that when I interviewed for my book last year, you said that before the Cape Town game, there was a sense of that, South Africa are underdogs. You play against the world champions. We must go out there and just put up a good show. But there wasn't great expectation. When we spoke to Corbus, another second rower, a couple of weeks ago, he spoke about how the pressure sort of ratcheted it up as the tournament went on, and as you won games, it became more and more tense, which I suppose it does when you get to the knockout stages of any competition. But going into the game on that particular morning, was there a feeling of confidence?
So I don't think you go into any game not believing you can win. If you go in there thinking you're going to lose, you are definitely going to lose. They say whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're always right. And I think if you go in thinking you're going to be on the back foot, you will be on the back foot. I think we were confident, but there was definitely an element of caution. During the week we discussed with Kitch, a couple of the senior players, around what we would do if things didn't go well, if they didn't go according to plan. What was Plan B? And we worked on a Plan B, and to be quite frank, we were terrible at it. And eventually we said to him, "Listen, coach, this is awful. We're hopeless at this. We've got to stick to Plan A. And Plan A is a good one for us and our skill set and our ability, and we've got to stick to it." And that proved to be right. And I think statistically, again, if you have a Plan B, you're much more likely to fail on Plan A, and then Plan B fails as well for sure. So the fact that we eventually went in with one game plan, thinking, we had a chance of beating these guys if we could just, maybe shut Jonah down a little bit and stop him scoring tries and getting them over the game line every opportunity. If we could close him down a little bit, we thought we would have a shot, and we set up our defensive structure a little differently. And fortunately, the plan came together. He got through once or twice, but there were cover tackles made. But we managed to stop the All Blacks from scoring tries, and that was probably the most critical thing. And the longer we managed to hold on, the more confident we grew, the more we believed.
Okay, but you basically went back then you decided to go for what had worked for you in the World Cup.
Yes.
Because Brenden Fenter told me that he was the first person to tell me about the Plan B. And the way he told it to me, and this was a while ago that I spoke to Brenden about it, he said that it didn't sound like it was so much a Plan B, but like actually a Plan A at one stage, where Kitch was quite seduced by that game you guys played at the end of the tour in 1993. You'll recall the Springboks played in Ulster. I can't remember. It was a scratch Irish combination, and I think Kitch just gave you guys license to just play off the cuff that night, and you did. You played off the cuff, and I think you scored about 68 points. I mean, the Box scored 68 points,
yeah.
And then he thought, okay, we can maybe play that game against the All Blacks, and apparently there was alarm bells ringing in the camp, thinking, "No, what's Kitch on? Why is he suddenly changed what's worked?" Is that how it happened?
No, I don't think it was exactly like that. I think it was more a matter of what if what we've done in the last 4 or 5 weeks isn't working. Because let's be honest, we hadn't played it against a player like Jonah. We hadn't seen the All Blacks up front for some time. We didn't know what was coming our way. We just seen this juggernaut on TV, and I think the fear that Kitch had is that we were not a team that was ever going to be great at chasing a game. We're not an extravagant team who could, move the ball around, showing great running skills and offloads and ability to, switch direction and do all those glamorous things that drive the spectacular tries. And to chase the game for us was going to be difficult. And I think his thought process was more that if the All Blacks, get ahead, if they get a commanding lead at some point early, how are we going to chase the game? How are we going to get back in this game? Because playing our kicking territorial game was never going to get you back in a game if you're behind. And I think from there we worked on. And if I remember correctly, Kitch called it the brains game. It was it was very different. It was about quick tap and goes and moving the ball and going to the tips and then back again, and different guys performing different roles around rucks and carrying and when we started practicing it and we tried to make it happen for us, we bashed into each other, we knocked each other over. We didn't even have opposition and we were getting beaten. It was horrendous. So we said to him in the middle of that training session, no, we got to stick to what we know. This is not going to work for us. If we have to go to this in the game, we'll find a way to go to it. But right now, we're actually just making mistakes, and we just, it's probably just eroding our confidence, to be quite honest. And let's stick to what we know.
Joel, I'll ask you first and then Mertz after that. Obviously, Jonah is a huge part of that final and a huge part of the lead into that final. After the semi-final, all the focus was on him as well. Just you guys, how you saw him. I know you guys were impressed with what you saw in the semi-final, but building up to tackling this guy, and did he become smaller, so to speak, every time somebody tackled him on the field? And then Mertz, sorry, I just wanted to ask you, also playing in the same team as a guy like that, how that affected sort of your outlook. Was it almost just like give the ball to Jonah?
So Brenden, I'll tell you, it's an interesting question, that, because the key with that All Black side is if you put too many numbers in Jonah's direction, then a guy like Mertz who can step and go, Frank Bunce, Walter Little, they'll punish you, inside. A Bashap will snipe around the edges, and you'll have Zinni running around the corners. So it's not like you can just crowd one area and think that the problem is going to go away, because as soon as you do that, you free up space elsewhere. You've got to be subtle in your approach and maybe use a little bit of push and pull to make sure the contact happens in the right area for your team, for your needs. And so that's what we did. We stood a little bit wider. We didn't want Jonah to have a one-on-one with James, or with any single player for that matter. And we just tried to make sure, wherever he went, there was traffic. And if one guy missed him, then the next one or the next two guys would hopefully drag him down. And it worked quite well. James cracked him a few times. When he did make one or two little inside breaks, it was Mark Andrews who made a tackle. Joost made a tackle on him. When he got around the outside, Yapi tackled him and into touch the one time. So it's not that you can devote all your attention in one direction. It's about just being smart in the way you push the contact to where you want it to be, because else you will be punished by the other great players in that side.
Yeah, playing with him, I guess. He'd had that marvellous game in the semi-final against England. He's, in those days, wings were slightly less likely than these days to come off their wing and sort of have a roving commission. So Jonah was a guy that you wanted to get the ball in the hands of, because if he spent 20 minutes, like anyone, if they spend 20 minutes and the ball doesn't come out their way, naturally you're going to lose not a little bit of interest, but you're just not going to be as activated if it does come your way. So getting him the ball was important for the team, because he was obviously quite a big spark for us. So I think in hindsight, maybe we tried to get the ball too simply and too much to him, but we did want to give him the ball, and he was a big part of it. You're right, Joel, guys like Bunce and Little in the midfield, they can hurt people on attack as well. And I think they were the same, just trying to get the ball out to Jonah. And, as a result, like Joel says, there weren't gang tackles on Jonah. You're up really, really quick on him, but it was inevitably James getting up really quick on him. If he did happen to miss him or whatever, Yapi was there as well. But it's, they were just quick and decisive hits, and guys went low on him, and they were very, very committed and chopped him down. At the same time, he's always going to be a threat right the way through the 80 minutes. So, you're talking about wanting to stick with your plan A. We did too. We got a lot of criticism from New Zealand afterwards. Oh, you should have changed the game. You should have tried not to move the ball around. But problem with that was, as you say, we were comfortable with our plan A. It had worked very well. We knew it worked when we executed well. And, do you change that and go for a new game that isn't proven, that hasn't been proven to be successful for you, that you're less comfortable with, you're less familiar with? And so we just kept trying. We trying to throw punches. And I think that's what we had to do. In hindsight, I think we'd probably keep trying. The problem was with the Boks, every time we threw a punch, they'd take the punch with a headbutt and we'd get a sore wrist rather than you getting a sore nose. And that continued throughout the game. And, all we could do was ultimately take our hats off to what had been an incredible performance. And, I know South African teams over the course of history have often been accused of, one-dimensional or just physical. It doesn't mean that you guys can't play. You look at some of the amazing, skillful players you've produced, right from when I started watching these test matches, South Africa, New Zealand, the likes of Danny Gerber and Ray Moore to the Duplessis brothers and Hasey Pina and all those, you guys can play. It's just what's best to do. And it was the same at the World Cup last year, 2019. The Boks went into that final. They said, there's not going to be any subtlety here. You run hard at us, England. We're just going to smack you even harder. And they did. And then they, in the right moments, they showed their skills and showed their abilities. So, like I say, we didn't want to go to a plan B anyway.
Was that, Mert, so it wasn't a question I was going to ask, but you made me think of it now. Wasn't that one of the reasons that the All Blacks struggled to win a World Cup for a while? Was because the Springboks, let's not call it finals rugby. They sort of played a World Cup type of rugby. I suppose the word pragmatic's the best way to. I don't like the word conservative. Is that why you guys did maybe take longer to win the World Cup again than you should have?
No, not necessarily. I think they're all different cases. 99, we probably weren't as strong a team as people had made out. We beat England in the pool match, and then suddenly the drums started beating for us. But I don't think we were as strong as that. But also we were encountering teams that did lift themselves on the day to beat the All Blacks. I know the All Blacks and the Springboks have got a very, very similar history, but whether it was thanks to the Springboks being, out of the world scene for so many years or whatever, the All Blacks sort of, for a lot of the other nations, became the feather in the cap, the team to beat. And so, France would lift on occasions, and Australia would lift, in the World Cup on occasions as well. Quite often the team that beat the All Blacks, if it was in the quarters or the semis, would go on and lose the next game. I'm not taking any comfort in that, but no, I just think teams lifted against us, and, that's a compliment in and of itself. But we just weren't good enough at the end of the day. It only takes one day, and there's so little between all the top teams. As I say, we came into that tournament 5th favourite. So, to beat England like we did in Cape Town was almost on world rankings sort of thing. It was almost an upset ourselves. So, not making any excuses or anything.
We'll talk about excuses. Brendan's got a question. I'm sure you're going to ask about Susie now, Brendan.
I wasn't going to quite phrase it that way, Gavin. But yeah, I was going to ask Mert if he went out for seafood that the couple of days before the final.
No, I didn't. No, on the Thursday, that's the subject of it. I ate chicken and mayonnaise sandwiches. To be fair, for a while afterwards, I couldn't eat a lot of chicken. But I'm not sure whether that was just the sick feeling in my gut having lost the game. I don't think it does anyone any. I think it does everyone a disservice, really, to talk too much about that sort of thing. We lost the game, the final, fair and square. I certainly would never try to suggest that that we lost for any reason that happened in the days leading up to it. So. We ran into a team that was prepared to tackle us and was able to tackle us where other teams hadn't been able to. So it's interesting to see, a couple of reports come out recently about seafood and whatnot. It's like, I don't think that was it at all. We were eating in the hotel. We're staying in the hotel. Like I said to you before, we were familiar with coming back up to Joburg. And like I say, I think it does a disservice to the box, really, to talk too much about it. So I hope that doesn't look rude, but it's probably not something I want to get into.
Okay, because you guys were, you don't want to talk about it, but I was in the press box that day, so I never noticed this until I watched it later on TV. You guys were, some of your guys were really sick. The TV cameras picked them up on the side of the field vomiting. It wasn't pretty.
I saw, Jeff Wilson got a little bit of airtime because he was vomiting sideline. You've seen his complexion. It was possibly sunstroke. He got badly sunburned. I can't throw stones on that count, but look, like I say, I'm not going to say we had a fair number of the party that on the Thursday night suddenly came down with a fairly violent sickness, but we got to the game on the Saturday and we knew we were a fit team, and we went into it with, again, not overconfidence, but just confidence to give it a crack. And 100 minutes later, and there was not much between the teams, and we didn't get there. And that's really, like I say, all I probably want to focus on.
I want to ask something, Mert. We often talk here in South Africa, obviously, about Madiba and the effect and him coming out in that 6 jersey. And it's obviously, from a South African point of view, it's a great moment. But I don't think we've spoken too much around here anyway of what the effect it was on you guys standing there lined up for the anthems and seeing that happen and history sort of playing out around in front of you. How was that for you, standing there and watching that happen?
Well, that was an awesome moment just to meet a figure like that. Such an important figure in human history. An incredible thing he was able to do, you know, after 27 years of incarceration to come out and to have the dignity to unify a nation rather than be just filled with bitterness. And we thought it was quite incredible. I mean, you know, personally, I was trying to reconcile, this is an amazing moment. I'm going to look back on this all my life to meet such an historical figure. And yet I've got to concentrate in about a minute's time. I've got to try and get this kickoff 10 meters. So, you know, it was a funny one like that. And we clearly we didn't know what was going on in the background until you see, you know, Invictus. And I know it's a film adaptation of it, but it still does kind of indicate that there was a lot going on in the background. And what we did notice, what was really tangible, I guess, was the change from the start of the tournament to the final in the African population of South Africans who had traditionally been very, very strong supporters of the All Blacks. You know, the guys in the team had already told me when we first got to South Africa, you know, when we get to Cape Town, there'll be a huge, huge local support for the All Blacks. And there was, you know, they just loved the All Blacks. But by the end of the tournament, and it was a stark contrast, you know, going in the bus to the ground on the Saturday and to Ellis Park, just everybody of every hue in South Africa had turned into Springbok supporters, and we could really feel that.
So that in a way sort of deadened the disappointment. I think it was Sean Fitzpatrick who said that after the game, although he was disappointed, he also had this feeling of having been involved in a historical moment, and that made it easier.
Yeah, I'm sure he said that with the intent of being gracious too, which is that's quite big for Fitzy, to be honest. He's a cracking bloke. He was my first All Black captain. I absolutely love him. He's been awesome to me both during my career and afterwards. But yeah, look, it wasn't much consolation. We're still obviously, you know, disappointed like everybody is from every game and every you know, final they may have lost in their sporting life. So it doesn't help a lot. But, you know, when you step aside and look back, and we were part of you know, an iconic match in the course of human history, not just sporting history. So, you know, it's nice to have been a part of that. I mean, they made a movie out of it, as we know. And even if I can't really endorse the bloke they found to play me, I think they found
me for that matter.
They tried to find the palest, ugliest blokes they could to play us, but
with the skinniest legs, yeah.
And I note their careers have since not sort of taken off. You know, I was most annoyed. I was playing in France at the time, and had some mates, some big Polynesian mates, who went down to act as extras in the movie, and they were playing cards with, you know, Clint Eastwood in between takes. I was talking to a good mate of mine, Epi Tyone. He said, "Bro, I'm playing Texas Hold'em with Clint Eastwood." I'm going, geez, I could have tried to lose 15 kg and replay myself, Joel. You probably would have been at the same weight anyway.
Good times. It was actually, I went on site with them a couple of times and got to meet them all as well. It was quite amazing. But certainly the guy who played me was Scott Eastwood, Clint's son, who has gone on now and is starting to become starting to get some big roles. But his efforts on the rugby field were woeful, to say the least.
I noticed we did a lot of 1-2 cuts, you know, the scissors moved 10 and 12. There was a lot of that going on.
Take that out.
Mertz, I don't know if we're going to go there because it was after the World Cup, but I'm going to go there anyway because it just makes it feel as if we're not just sitting here beating you. You came back 12 months later, and you actually achieved something that New Zealand had never achieved in their history, which was actually to win a series in South Africa. How much did that make up for losing the World Cup final? Because that's a monumental achievement, given that you actually played 4 tests on that tour, because you also played the first Tri-Nations test on South African soil. Yeah,
look, it was an awesome achievement. Great to be a part of it. But look, I don't mind you beating on me at the moment. It's 25 years since 95, and that's what we're here to talk about. And I've got no problem with that. We'll have our moment next year, maybe, but it won't be a World Cup memory. But yeah, look, I think Sean Fitzpatrick may have been eyeing up retirement if the final had gone differently in 95, and I know that he had a burning desire to, not to put it right because you can't put it right, or it's not putting it right, not to make the result any different, but to come back and achieve something in the Republic. And yeah, it was huge next year. And we knew that one test being the Tri-Nations final test, and then the next 3 being the official series, we knew that we really had to try and win it 3-1 to make sure that it didn't turn into a 2-1. Oh, plus the Tri-Nations game. Yeah, that counts. So it was good. I missed the middle 2 tests. I came back to contribute to the Springboks loss, the Springboks victory in the 4th test at Ellis Park again, my old favourite. But yeah, it was good. It's a huge part of rugby history, the Springbok All Black rivalry, and I grew up learning about it. You know, my father had played 5 years in Natal. I grew up looking at his Natal rugby jersey, and just learning the history of the Box All Blacks. You know, from 21 and 28 tour, and 37 you came out and beat us in New Zealand. 49 we got dumped 4-0. 56 finally we got a win, but it was in New Zealand, and Danny Craven, you know, very gracious in his speech. And yeah, so to think that to be a part of a part of that history, that Springbok All Black history, and something, you know, the first time was a great feeling. But nothing made up for that 95 World Cup.
Joel did say in the first segment before Brenden got the power failure last week, he did say that we could go back to the old tours. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there really should be a place for it. We know how much it's worth to the grassroots, you know, to the smaller areas that don't get the test matches. I think when we look at the success and the passion of Lions tours, and you know that's coming up next year in South Africa, of course. While that's going on, I can't see why Australia or New Zealand can't have a full tour. These days you can take 2 full squads. You know, you can send your midweek team off playing around the regions and stuff. I absolutely think it should be a big part of it. It's kind of unique in international sport, isn't it, to rugby? So I really do, and I'm looking forward to the Lions tour next year. I'm trying to work out how I get a few gigs there. I've asked Joel. You know, he's got a few things going on. I don't want to do any cycling with you, but golf and Sudoku I'm happy with.
You're in. I've entered your team already. You're in.
It's just because you want to make sure you have at least one win.
No. I just want the Kiwis to come out and watch the Boks beat the Lions. That's all.
The one thing
sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say it is a fantastic part of rugby, and I think as soon as World Rugby sorts out that global season, and you know, then we can move on. It's a unique sport, and when you look at the travel and the tours and things like that, it's an essential part of our sport, and it's an essential difference, really. So you know, I hope it gets sorted sooner rather than later. I've made a couple of comments in recent years about Super Rugby and the possibility of not being so logistically difficult. It's not because I don't like South Africa at all, because I love the history between South Africa and New Zealand. If South Africa was beside New Zealand, it'd be a no-brainer. We'd be playing all the time. But just the logistics of those time zones and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to a kind of a world sport. If we want to develop the game, we've got to look at what it's going to look like 20 years down the track, build that structure now so we can scale it, you know. But anyway.
I was gonna say, because we've heard some comments, or we've seen some comments out of Australia there for you with Super Rugby, but we were always wondering why you wanted to dump us out of Super Rugby, Mertz.
Well, look, it's certainly not dumping. I mean, I think the natural progression is to have, you know, Dubai or Barcelona being in the same time zone. You know, imagine what South Africa could do developing that region. I mean, ultimately, I think it'll end up being Europe and South Africa in the same time zone. The Americas are in one, and Asia's sort of in another. So I think that's where it's going to end up. And, you know, why not have playoffs? I think you should have maybe South Africa hosting all the playoffs one year, New Zealand and Australia maybe the next, Argentina. I mean, so long as the commentary crews, Joel, can keep traveling around the world and eating steak and drinking Malbec over in Argentina, we're happy, aren't we?
Yeah, and taking their bicycles with so they can ride the local mountains. That's all that counts.
So I don't see you doing that, Mertz.
We'll get Mertz on a bike still, don't worry. It's coming.
it's not getting on it that I'm worried about. It's how I come off it. Well, you know all about that, though.
I've read that book.
I just wanted to ask, obviously, about the obvious, the famous kick, Joel. Just what went through your mind and how it felt going through then, and same from Mehrtens. Obviously, the same question.
Yeah, so Kitchett on the Thursday afternoon had asked me why I don't kick more drop goals, and we were at Teachers Training College, which, I mean, their training ground is harder than this table. It was really hard, and the forwards were doing some lineouts, and I was down doing some kicking. Pino was kicking back for me. There was no other backs there. Well, I think Johan Roux was there, scrum off, just helping the forwards. And he said to me, why don't you kick more drop goals? He made it sound so easy, and I thought, sure. All right, well, I mean, it's the right question because, you know, come tight games, it is important. And we'd won our last warm-up game against Western Province at Newlands with a last-minute drop goal. So I smashed a few and was hopeless to start. And slowly, you know, after a few, the timing got a little bit better and got to Ellis Park on the Friday, and the timing was, you know, much easier on the soft, luscious field. And I struck them really nicely. And then we got in the game, and, you know, when you know it's a tight game, and it's 3 points here or there is going to win it or make the big difference. You know, we try to take every opportunity we can, and we got to the end. We called a back row move, and it was a great back row move. I mean, if you've got Rudolf Strauly coming off the base of the scrum with his explosive power, and Joost outside him, Andre Joubert, one or two dummy runners, and, you know, speed on the outside, it's quite hard to defend against a little attack force like that in a decent size blind space, you know. So it was a good call. But when I looked up, I realized that New Zealand had obviously seen what we were doing. They'd studied the videos, and they knew exactly what was going on. And there was, you know, real space for me to step inside and maybe go for the drop goal. So we called to Joost, and we changed the call, and over it went. And, you know, I was asked by someone this morning how I knew it was going over, but I hit it so sweetly that as soon as I looked up and saw how it was rotating, I knew it was sailing true, which was a huge relief, because to overrule France wasn't something you do every day.
And Mert, for you guys from standing on the other side there, I mean, when you saw it go over, did heart sink or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there were 3 or 4 minutes to go, and, you know, in the context of a 10-minute half and extra time, it wasn't all over. It made it difficult, especially with the roar and then the crowd just going mad, and you know, you could see the box lift. And if they'd had energy to get up and smash you for the rest of the game, then that last 3 or 4 minutes was obviously going to be even more intense. And we didn't anticipate really it because it's sort of on the wrong side of the field, even though it makes sense when you think about it to drop back into the pocket against the grain and into that little gap. But we didn't anticipate it was going straight from the first phase. So, you know, as Joel said, we're concentrating at that stage on Joubert, who's out wide, you know, beautiful dry conditions in the thinner air. You can throw a long pass. He's got a lot of gas. I was probably focused on, I think probably Brenden Venter was on by that stage instead of Henny, or was Henny still on, Joel?
So Brenden was on for James. He was out on the right wing, I think. Henny was still at 12. Yeah, Henny and Yoppie still in the midfield.
So whoever it was at 12, didn't matter whether they're big or small. I was trying to get up. I was never going to smash anyone, so I had to get up fast. So all I was thinking was getting the line up and getting up to Henny and allowing the other guys outside, Bunsen, Little and whatnot, to drift on out. So, you know, by the time I realised what you were doing, Joel, it was too late to get back. And as you know, you just hit it beautifully. It was that was better than true. It just zinged off and went high, and, you know, one look round and it was sailing through, and you could see it against the crowd in the background as well. But sailing through, it was just. I mean, I feel bad talking about it because you should be talking through it for the next hour, Joel. It was that beautiful a kick and that important a kick. I don't know if you got a drop goal throughout the rest of the game. I know I got one in the second half, but I don't know if your 3 points in the main part of the game had been penalties, or was there a drop goal there as well?
There was a drop goal as well. Yeah, 2 penalties and a drop.
So I mean, that was the best drop goal I think I've seen hit. You know, even these young kids now, they're all hitting them pretty straight these days. You know, we've seen Super Rugby, which has started up back in Aotearoa. Plenty of drop goals going there, and they're hitting pretty true, but not as high and as beautiful as that one from a South African perspective.
So how aware were you guys? How aware were you guys of the other narrative that was developing in that final, which was that if South Africa didn't win the game, if it was a draw, that you were going to concede the World Cup on the basis that you'd had players sent off in the World Cup? And Mert, I can actually ask you the same question in a sense and ask you, would you guys have bought that if you'd become world champions after a drawn final?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, for us, Gav, we knew. We were very aware that we had to win the game. We couldn't draw the game. And which is why in that situation, we were just chasing any points we could get our hands on. And we knew that a draw wasn't enough. And unfortunately, we managed to step up. But I mean, I think to your point, losing it on a draw or winning it on a draw for both teams would have been horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. It's a terrible law that, and hopefully that's changed.
Mert?
I can't even remember whether I knew that or not. I'd like to think that I would have at the time, but certainly it didn't form part of what we were trying to do. There's no way. I don't think you'd find a Springbok team or an All Black team that would say, "Yeah, let's go for the draw because we know if we get that, we get the win." No. So it's a moot point now anyway. But we wouldn't have.
Yeah,
but it would have been a bit hollow. That's what I was really asking. Would it have been maybe a bit hollow? I mean. It's just a weird way to win a World Cup.
Yeah, it's on the day. That's the nature of a final. It's on the day, and it should be decided on the day rather than stuff. I mean, I can see why they might think that it hopefully improves your discipline throughout the rest of the tournament. But nobody's thinking ahead to the final in the first few phases.
I was going to say, yeah. So after the match, of course, there was. I remember waking up after this euphoria of the night and with a very bad hangover, and waking up to Sunday Times. I think it was headlines there about the World Cup dinner, and Louis Late's speech giving Derek Bevan the gold watch and the All Blacks walking out. I know we don't speak about it anymore, but on the night, did it influence? I mean, Joel, you guys were on the top of the world, and I'm sure you guys walked out. Do you think back to that at all now? What do you think about it? Joel could go
Me or Joel? Sorry. Yeah, Joel. Yeah.
So I can honestly say, Brenden, it was hugely embarrassing. And it was one of those cringeworthy moments where you look back and you're on top of the world and you're trying to celebrate. You're trying to, for all the right reasons, keep your feet on the ground and stay humble. And then the president of your rugby union stands up and says something horrendous. It was a proper cringeworthy moment, and it was something that I think when the All Blacks up and walked out, we sat there. We said, the first thought was, "Oh, we don't blame them because that was just horrible." And I don't think, to be honest, I don't think we left that much later anyway because it just put such a dampener on the whole evening. But it was really, it was not a pleasant evening, and it was made terrible by Dr. Late. You had a habit every now and then of saying the things he shouldn't say.
I can't remember the incident too well at all, to be honest. It's funny how, isn't it? I can't remember whether we knew about the draw rule. I can't remember much about the dinner. I can certainly remember the horrendous court session that we had the whole next day to finish off the tournament. But I think it was probably towards the end of the dinner anyway. I think, Joel, and it was South Africa's moment. I think we were probably happy to take any excuse just to make ourselves scarce and allow South Africans to celebrate a South African victory. So it's a little bit unfortunate, but there are a lot of people like that, and you can't say much at the time about it because you won and stuck it up as the loser.
Yeah, but I suppose just to add to that, every leadership style has its good and its bad side. And let's be honest, Doc Late ran the rugby in this country unbelievably well in the period he was president. And, it was with a common purpose for the Boks to be the best. It was financially sound. Everything you can wish for in a sporting code was well taken care of up until that point. And then obviously the Packer Murdoch thing came along and there was some controversy there. But up until then, he had done an amazing job. And yes, he was a bit of a bully in the way he went about things. I think it's fair to say that. And if he was still alive today, I would still say it. But on the night to stand up and say, and I'm sure he was probably a bit sauced, actually, now that I think about it, to stand up and say, we would have won every World Cup Yeah, we would have won every World Cup if we played in them. It was completely out of line and hugely embarrassing.
Yeah, good man. No, it's just it was to me. I mean, especially even contrasted even more by the Madiba moment earlier in the day. You know, to have that late on in the evening just felt so almost empty at the end of the day for that. On just the last question from me in terms of that, going over to you mentioned the Packer thing after that. How much I don't know how was those next couple of weeks? Because you had this great unity, Joel, about winning a World Cup together, you know, uniting the country, and then straight after that, and we've asked Mark this as well, and you guys were suddenly into this negotiations and people doing contracts and talking behind people's backs and secret meetings and all these other sort of things. How much did that play a role in sort of, I don't know, you know, taking away that unity a bit?
So I think I don't think the fact that Packer and Murdoch came along and vied for the professional rights to rugby took away the unity. I think the way we behaved in those situations took away our own unity. I think we as a Springbok team, to be perfectly honest, became a little divided around the future of SA Rugby and where we should be, you know, laying our loyalty or casting our votes. We ended up having you know, final discussions as a divided group, as opposed to, you know, maintaining our unity and what got us so far. So it did divide us a little bit, and I think on the back of that, you know, the management changed and Kitch left and Markroft came in, and that divided us even more because he didn't really, you know, want the 95 players to be that heavily involved in his structure. And so it was a team that broke up quite shortly after the Rugby World Cup for a number of reasons. But there's no doubt that the Packer Murdoch scenario brought about professional rugby and has obviously helped create what we have today, which is a wonderful game where the players are well played and deservedly so, rightly so. And it's a huge part of our history. But did we handle it to the best of our collective ability? Absolutely not.
Mehrtens, you guys on that side of the world as well, how did you guys go through that? I mean, we've obviously focused a lot on South Africa.
We I guess, resolved to do everything together as much as possible. And, you know, I was a first-year player, pretty naive. I believed in what the WRC was proposing. I mean, I think they were talking about at the time what rugby is going to end up looking like, you know, with a series of franchises across the world divided into conferences based on time zones. I think that's where we're going to end up, funnily enough. And I think we had probably a few guys who were looking at, you know, having been amateur all their careers, having 2 or 3 good years of a good payout under that system, and we'd all ended up signing with the WRC. But then just a few little things got picked at. People were saying in New Zealand that, you know, the WRC meant that there'd be no more All Blacks and no more Springboks. And you go, well, how stupid is that? Nobody's going to buy rugby and then deny itself the biggest jewels in the crown, you know, the international game and stuff like that. So it was a bit, you know, probably ignorant of other people, but we saw a little bit what was going on. I didn't see so much, but I was happy to take the advice of the older guys, and we were all in it together until such time as a couple got kind of isolated from the herd by the establishment in New Zealand and signed. And I guess once they'd gone, we all sort of went. And I remember there were a couple of conference calls. And I don't think all the Australians were quite there. There were a few South Africans that weren't on the line either. You know, in those days, in '95, you've got problems with the line anyway. You know, there was, if you're calling South Africa, which, you know, I was listening to my parents always used to call South Africa, talk to their friends in Natal and whatnot, and there was that delay. You know, hello, how are you? Hello. And so we had those problems anyway. But then on this occasion, you know, we were trying to say, come in, South Africa, are you there? Are you there? Nothing. And I think at that point we realised, well, you know what, the game can't afford to be divided. So basically it's gone one way and we've all got to get in behind it, and did so.
Was there a bit of enmity in New Zealand towards, I mean, I know there was, but I mean, in your experience, maybe not so much from you because you were a young player at the time, but was there a lot of enmity towards Francois, because he was the guy who really turned his back on WRC?
No, funnily enough, I think there was a bit of understanding that, you know, we were actually, I mean, it was all about moving into a world that was professional, and it was about, you know, still respecting the old values and playing hard and whatnot, but it was a commercial world, and you know, ultimately there was going to be that element of, you know, looking after your own self-interest. As a player, if it's your career, if that's your profession, then you do have to look after yourself like that. So I think there was an understanding there. And I know Francois and Fitzy are very good mates in London, play a fair bit of golf together. And no, not so much. I think within New Zealand, there was probably a bit more enmity towards the couple of guys who were the first to sign with the New Zealand Union, because it felt like, you know, if we do everything as a team, you know, whether it's right or wrong, suddenly gone off and done something else. But no, look, it all panned out. I'm waiting to see if there'll be a bid from Packer Junior at any point to see if they can. That's why I'm living in Sydney. I'm just waiting for that call, you know. Buy World Rugby. I haven't got the change on me now, but you know, help me put it together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Gav, I'm fine. Are you any last questions?
No, we can't keep these guys here the whole afternoon.
Yeah.
The whole
Yeah.
I only need 2 more questions to get to the weekend.
No, listen, thanks, guys. Jesus, this is a lekker chat. I think we could talk for hours going on like this. But yeah, it was really good. Thanks, Joel and Mertz, for the time. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure,
Thanks,
Brenden. Pleasure, Gavin. Yeah, and Mertz, great catching up, mate. Been wonderful chatting.